Hello lovely writers and welcome to the Write channel where we talk all things creative writing. My name's Nicola Monaghan and I'm a prize-winning author from Nottingham in the United Kingdom, and today I'm going to tell you all about how to write a killer synopsis. So why is it important to know how to write a great synopsis? Well, this is a really integral part of any submissions package that you would send to an agent or indeed straight to a publisher to try and get published. So it's really important. It gives a sense of what your story is from beginning to end, so it gives a really good idea of what the narrative is and how everything's going to play out. And it makes an agent or publisher understand that you do know what a story is, you do know how to tell one, and that you do have a plan for where this particular story is going to go. If you want a written guide, there's one on my website, so go and have a look and download yourself a copy, and there's some examples of good synopses there as well. So first of all, what is a synopsis? When you're asked for this kind of document, what does that really mean? Well, a synopsis is a pure action summary of your story. So it needs to tell the story from beginning to end, and it needs to give the character arc of your main character. That's another way to look at it, as the character arc, if you're using those for planning, of your main character. It shouldn't contain stuff about theme, it shouldn't contain notes about your characterizations or anything like that. It really just needs to tell the story from the beginning to end, and it does need to include the end because an agent wants to know that you know what you're doing and that you know what the end will be. And it's not a spoiler from the point of view of being a professional working in publishing. Agents and publishers are very used to reading books this way and knowing what the ending is when they're starting out with them. So you really do need to include the ending in this document. So that's straightforward enough, just a pure action summary of what's going on in your book. So why are they so hard to write? Why does nearly every single writer I know hate writing synopses and really want to know how they can do it better? Well, there are a few things that let down a lot of synopses. And the first one is that once you've written the book, which is usually when you write the synopsis, it can be very hard to boil down your synopsis into the really important bits. And you find yourself as a writer going in and out of the little plot points and really not giving an overall sense of the book and going on for pages and pages if you're not careful. Whereas for most agents, most publishers, they only really want 2 or 3 pages. So that's what's really tricky about writing these documents. Another thing that often lets down synopses, even when they've got the action written down really well, is the tone and the style of them. They can be a bit dry and a bit boring. Some of that's inevitable when you're summarising such a bigger thing, but actually it's not totally inevitable. And one of my first tips for writing a killer synopsis is to try and get a little bit of the tone of the story into your synopsis. If it's a funny story, it should be a funny synopsis. If it's a gritty story, it should be a gritty synopsis. If you are telling a suspense story, there should be an element of suspense as somebody reads your synopsis. I think you probably get my point by now, but really try and bring something of the tone of the story into this document, for starters, because it will make it a lot more interesting in terms of reading it. Then the next thing is to work out which plot points to put in your synopsis and which ones to leave out, and what the actual content should be. As I've already said, there shouldn't be stuff about theme or notes about your characters. It needs to focus on the plot. And another way to look at it is that you are documenting the narrative arc of your main character. So we're looking at the main overall plot, the overarching story, the central key plot or story of your novel, which can be hard to boil down. You need to focus on your main character, your main narrative. It may be that there's a couple of different storylines. If you've got, say, 2 timelines and they both play a role, then try and switch between them in the synopsis to make it clear that that's what happens in the novel too. One of the things that I find helps me to write a synopsis is to go back to basics and think about something similar to the snowflake method. I've linked below to the snowflake method. You'll have heard me talk about this before. It is one of my go-tos when it comes to writing everything, but particularly when it comes to writing a synopsis. And the snowflake method, first of all, asks you to try and boil your book down to 1 sentence, which is so challenging. And it asks you to spend an hour writing that sentence, which also feels a bit of overkill, an hour for a sentence. But I absolutely guarantee that if you follow that to the letter and you sit down and you spend an hour trying to define your book in 1 sentence, you'll understand your book better and you'll get a brilliant sentence. So do spend some time over that first step. After that first step, you spend an hour again expanding it out into a paragraph, and also with this, spend the whole hour and then you expand it out into 3 paragraphs, and then you keep expanding like this, each time taking a significant chunk of time to do the work until you have the length of synopsis that you need. Now this gets over the fact that sometimes there are different requirements between different agencies and different publishers. So if you ask for a 2-page synopsis by one publisher and a 5-page synopsis by another and a 3-paragraph synopsis by another, you can actually create all of those documents using this same method and have them all saved somewhere just to pull up when you're doing your submissions. So it can basically help you write as short or as long a synopsis as you need, but start with that one sentence and build out. And that way you'll get to the core of what your story is rather than weaving in and out of the different twists and turns that your plot takes. So that's how you work out what to include in your synopsis. And then finally, some tips on how you make it as good as possible. So hopefully if you follow the snowflake method the way I described, you'll end up with something. It might be the quite dry, boring version of your synopsis. So then you have to make it into the exciting document that is funny like your book, or that is suspenseful like your book, and so on and so forth. And the key and the secret to doing this is actually the same as for any writing. Draft, redraft, redraft, edit, polish. Don't be satisfied with the first version of this document. Revisit it lots and lots and lots. Keep polishing, keep refining until it reads the way you want it to. That may mean that you take the same material and do a complete and utter rewrite because the tone isn't really what you want at all. But drafting and editing and polishing is the key to getting this document right. It's the key to making this read in a way that's going to be appealing and that's going to put across what your book is. Just like anything else that you might write, all writing is rewriting, as they say, and it's absolutely the same with your synopsis. So that is my final tip about writing a killer synopsis. Don't be satisfied with your first version. Keep editing and keep going until you get something that you know is much better. So they're my tips on writing a killer synopsis. Hope that's been helpful. If it has, and if you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. As I mentioned, you can download a written guide at my website, so do take a look at that. And hopefully see you again soon on the right channel. Thanks for watching. Take care.